everyone, welcome to episode 23 of Sketch Support. If you are new, my name is Allison Davis and I am a scrapbooker and sketch artist for my family scrapbook store, Scrapbook Generation, which is located in Springfield, Missouri. We also have an online store as well as the physical location in Springfield. So Sketch Support is all about showing how you can customize and adapt a sketch to fit your needs. I take one sketch and show you multiple layouts, all created from that one sketch, with each layout looking completely different. Sketches can be such a valuable tool from everyone, from beginner to advanced. A beginner might follow the sketch exactly, while a more advanced scrapbooker might use it more as a starting point to build their own ideas from. And there are always ways you can alter the sketch to work with your photos or theme or style. I always say that everyone can benefit from using sketches. Sketches do all the heavy lifting, allowing you to have all the fun. The sketch included in this video is free for you to download at Scrapbook Generation. We always provide sketches that include measurements, placements, and directions to make putting together your layout as easy as possible. And I'll link to that sketch down below. There's also a 3-page PDF of 23 more sketch examples showing how you can adapt the sketch used in this video to better fit your needs. Also, I've added a lot of new sketches to our online store since my last video, so you might want to go check them out. There's quite a range of different ones available, and I'll link to all of those new ones down below in the video description. So let's jump in with a closer look at the sketch that has been used as the starting point for each layout in this video. I always take a little end of the year pause to prepare for some bigger events that I'm involved in. And I wanted the first sketch for my return to be a fun and really bold design. I like to sit down at my computer and just create sketches for hours on end, and this one really stood out to me as something that could be interesting for this series. I was envisioning so many different ways to adapt it and kind of play with it. There are several slanted pieces layered together, creating this unique background. Then there are two 3x5-inch photos arranged at the upper edge with lots of flowers clustered around it. 3x5-inch photos will always be one of my favorite photo sizes to work with. They're kind of the Goldilocks of photo sizes. Not too big, not too small. They're just right. I also appreciate that a lot of times they can be cropped down from a 4x6-inch print, so you don't have to do any kind of editing before you print. With the slanted pieces, I want to point out a few things and give some tips on how to put this together. For the strips that don't go all the way across the layout, you can just slant the strip and cut off the excess hanging off the layout. For the strips that do go all the way across the layout, you can't just slant the strip because it leaves a gap and you can see that base cardstock. Instead, you would need to cut the slant along one edge and then adhere the strip straight. I just use my paper trimmer to cut a slant like this, and then you adhere it onto your layout so that left and right edge line up with the left and right edges of the cardstock base. And if you don't like slanted designs or you just don't want to mess with all of that, you can always simplify it by just using straight horizontal strips. Another tip, because there is so much layering going on, to make sure that those slanted edges really stand out, you might want to do something to define those edges, whether it's the stitch border you see on the sketch, or distressing the edges, or inking the edges. Just whatever method you prefer. It's really going to be helpful in making the details of this design stand out. Let's go ahead and move on to my first layout based on this sketch. For my first layout, I really don't think I could have followed this sketch any more closely. It is an exact replica of the sketch. I thought this sketch design was so fun, and I happen to have photos that fit, and this storyteller collection from Coco Vanilla was just perfect for this sketch. It had a great range of pattern papers and colors that worked well with this design, and the collection came with a packet of these flowers that worked pretty close to the sketch flower clusters. I used a different pattern paper for each slanted piece. When I'm arranging several patterns and colors together, I try to arrange them so that there's contrast between the two pieces that are next to each other. So I started with this light green and then went with a darker color, then a lighter pink, and you can see how that contrast keeps going down the strips. I also try not to place two similar patterns right next to each other, like this pink and this red. They both have kind of a dotted pattern. Same for the dark blue with hearts and the multicolored hearts. I like having a nice spread of not just color, but those patterns as well. To me, that gives a nice balance to the design. And I get that that's me being a perfectionist. I get super quirky about those kinds of things, but don't feel like that's something you have to do as well. That's the beauty of a hobby like this. We all have our own little guidelines that we like to follow, but that doesn't mean they apply to everyone or every style. We can figure out what works for us and focus on that and then not worry about the rest. To help my slanted edges stand out, I lightly distress the edges by running my fingernail along the edge. It just adds a little kind of lip on the end, and that gives a tiny bit of dimension and helps that edge stand out just a little bit more. I also added a stitch border along each edge. I used white to match the white throughout the collection, and I felt like that was a good neutral color to tie all of this together. I already mentioned the flowers and how well they match the sketch, but I also added in some extra detail. Anytime I'm creating clusters, I like to have a variety of elements, textures, and dimension. So I added some wooden pieces, some cutout hearts, a few enamel hearts, and some word and phrase stickers. So this layout came together really quickly because this collection had so much to offer. Coco Vanilla is quickly becoming one of my favorite companies. I think this is the fourth layout I've created from this collection alone. And those flower pieces were the part that made this come together so easy. With this one, I'm going to beat you all to the punch. Have you ever seen the movie Pitch Perfect and the part where the girl says her name is Fat Amy, and when she is asked why she calls herself fat, she says it's so other people won't call her that behind her back. And that feels like this moment. I'm going to call myself crazy, insane, disturbed, mad, unhinged, mental, all those fun labels, so you don't have to. I mentioned earlier that at the end of the year, I have to kind of take a pause. And that means that it had been quite some time since I had been able to do lots of stitching. And since it's my favorite technique, I was dying to do it. And when that mood to stitch hits, there is absolutely no stopping it. And we had some colder weather, and I was craving some comfy clothes, good TV, and some stitching. I used my Omnigrid ruler and a pencil to draw the lines an eighth of an inch apart. And this ruler is my absolute favorite ruler on the planet. It's 6 by 12 inch with lots of grid lines and angle lines, and I use it on every single layout I make. It really made drawing the lines for this so much easier. For this design, I started by drawing the slanted edges first, and then use that line as my guideline for the rest in that section, leaving 1/8 of an inch between each one. When it came to picking out the colors, I knew I wanted to pull from my photos and use red, blue, and possibly gray, but I felt like I needed more than just that. So I went through my winter themed pattern papers to see if I could find a collection that had those colors I wanted, plus a few more. And I came across this collection from Photoplay and this one from Bella Boulevard. And it was exactly what I was looking for. So I pulled from both of these and ended up using a light blue, teal, red, gray, dark blue, and yellow. The hardest part of this design was figuring out how I wanted to arrange the colors. I was unsure if I wanted to do them in a stripe pattern or if I wanted to use one color for each slanted section. And I think both would have worked well. It was just a matter of picking one. And I finally opted for the stripe pattern. One of my favorite styles of striped papers is small 1/8" stripes, and I thought that concept would look good with this. For most of the sections, I drew the lines with the slant, but for two of them, because I was doing the stripe pattern, I would need to change the direction to show that it was a different section. So this middle section here would have just bled into this section here, and you wouldn't be able to see that they are two different sections. So I decided to do vertical strips for those, so the slanted section design would still stand out as it is on the sketch. And I'm not gonna lie, this took me forever. I was also doing a lot of stitching on the next layout, and so I kind of alternated between this one and that one, and I would guess I spent around 25 to 30 hours stitching, and this one obviously took more time than the other by far. A little time-saving tip if you want to do a design like this, or really any kind of stitching heavy design, I suggest figuring out where you want your photos to go and adhere them first. That way you aren't wasting time on stitching in areas that are going to be covered anyway. And if you are interested in trying hand stitching on your layouts, but you don't know where to start, I have a video that shows my method and covers everything you need to know. So I'll link to that down below and you can check it out if you want to. As I was stitching on this layout, I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of the design. And I knew I was definitely going to use snowflakes. And in the beginning, I planned on following the sketch placements. But as the hours of stitching went by, I started toying with the idea of having tons of white punch snowflakes completely framing both photos. I started off with just the white snowflakes and tucked them slightly under the edges of the photos. And after I had that done, I felt like it would look better if I added in some colored snowflakes in a few areas. Then from there, I just kept adding detail. I had these enamel snowflakes from Bella Boulevard that matched so well, and also some metal snowflakes. Then to finish it all, I added some Nuvo Dream Drops in Cloud 9. And this color is so perfect for snow layouts. It's also the color that I would recommend if you are interested in trying Nuvo Drops, but you don't know what color to start with. It's a great neutral that goes with practically anything, and it has such a beautiful rainbow sheen to it. And I'll link to it down below. I feel like an interesting point to this layout is that there are some big changes to the sketch, but for the most part, it still follows it quite closely. So you can follow a sketch, but make big changes to adapt it to either your theme or style or whatever needs you might have. And again, I understand that this type of heavily stitched design is not for everyone. I always have people in my comments tell me I'm crazy for doing this much stitching, but this is my absolute favorite technique, and I greatly enjoy the process of doing it. I don't ever really worry about the time I spend on these layouts either. It doesn't matter to me if it's days or only a few hours. I enjoy creating and scrapbooking, and my enjoyment in that means doing it my way and incorporating the details and techniques that make me happy. And I strongly encourage you to do the same. Scrapbook for yourself and what you love, and don't worry about trying to please anyone else. My third layout has kind of an interesting look at the sketch. In some ways, it's a simplified version of the sketch, and in some ways it's not. First, it is simplified by using straight strips in place of the slanted pieces on the sketch. I loved the idea of using straight horizontal strips and giving an ease to creating with this sketch, while also still having a fun, detailed background. Now, as you can see, I didn't just go with plain strips. I ended up using wave strips. If you know me, you know that I love creating water-themed layouts, and I also love finding ways to incorporate that theme into the design of my layout. I thought this could be a really interesting take on the sketch, taking that detail and interest of this background to a different level. I alternated the direction of the waves to help the wave design stand out, and I also distressed the edges and added the hand stitch border. With this design, instead of using the same color for the whole design, I decided to match the color of the strip. So the yellow has yellow stitching and the red has red stitching and so on. I feel like this design idea could be adjusted in several ways. You could use the slanted pieces like the sketch, but add a decorative edge on them like waves or chevron or scallop. Another idea is that you could use different shapes in place of the slanted pieces. I used horizontal strips for this layout, but you could also use vertical strips, squares, hexagons, circles, or whatever else you can dream up. I also changed up the photos. Anytime I'm working with a sketch, specifically for this series, I don't worry about my photos being a perfect match to the sketch. I find photos that I'm looking forward to using and that I feel can be adapted to work with the sketch design. And there's so many ways you can do this. The easiest two would be breaking up a larger photo on a sketch into several smaller photos, or taking several smaller photos on a sketch and replacing them with one photo that matches the same general measurements as the grouping of smaller photos. For my layout, I had 3 2.5 by 3.5 inch photos, and I was able to layer and tilt them to fit close to the same general area as the 2 3 by 5 inch photos do. I didn't really have to make any adjustments to make this work. With the embellishments, I swapped out the flowers for a more scenic look. I added a sun and some clouds, and then a few small flower details here and there. For the clouds, I used a mix of die cut pieces and stickers. On the cloud stickers, I added some glitter and adhered them with foam adhesive for some dimension. The last thing I want to mention with this layout is the colors. When I'm picking papers for a layout, I let my photos drive that choice. With this one, I looked to the colors of my son's beach towel and tried to pull from that. And I found this older My Mind's Eye collection, and the colors were such a perfect fit. And I was not expecting to find a collection that would work like that. And I thought for sure I was going to have to piece it all together myself. So I was super happy to find this. And what I like about basing my color choices off of my photos is that sometimes you end up using papers or color combos that you usually wouldn't have gone for. And it's not like this collection is a rare color combo, but I never would have thought to use it for waves if it wasn't for this sketch and these photos. I like that it's not just the standard blue or greens for waves. Sometimes it's fun to do something a little out of the box and different. The last layout is always about showing how you can adapt a sketch to work with a different layout size. I always say never let the size of the sketch determine the size of your layout. There are so many ways you can adapt a sketch to fit or work with a different size of layout. One of the greatest benefits to this is that oftentimes you come up with design ideas that you otherwise might not have thought to do. To me, this layout is a good example of that. I don't think I ever would have thought to slant the photos and add a bunch of slanted pieces had it not been for this one-page sketch. For my 2-page layout, I decided to stretch the slanted strips design all the way across both pages and then use a row of photos as a stand-in for another slanted piece. The photos became a part of that background design. It felt like a good solution for adapting this one-page sketch into a 2-page layout. I didn't necessarily follow the exact same arrangement of those slanted strips. I focused on adding my photos first and then added the strips around that. And the photos are placed in a way that ties them into the slanted pieces by layering them in the same direction of the strips. So that top edge of the photos are on top of the papers while the bottom edge is tucked under, following that same pattern of layering you see on the sketch. A few changes I made to the arrangement was taking the slanted pieces all the way to the top of the layout. Because of the way the photos are incorporated, I felt like this was a better look than keeping the top section of the layout open. I also added in a few smaller arrow strips on the top of 2 pieces, one at the top section and one at the bottom section. This arrow paper is one of my favorite designs in this My Mind's Eye collection, so I always try to find a way to use it whenever I end up using this collection. I also distressed and stitched on each slanted piece, just like I have with the other layouts, to really make sure that all of those individual slanted pieces stand out instead of it just kind of blurring together. For my photos, I had 5 3x5" and 2 4x6". In the beginning, I had thought about trimming the 4x6" photos down to 3x5", but ultimately decided that those 2 were my favorite photos of the bunch, and I liked the idea of highlighting them by keeping them in that larger size. Since I made big changes to this design to work with a 2-page layout, as you can see, and as I previously talked about, I didn't follow the photo arrangement on the sketch. Don't be afraid to make big changes like this. You have to remember, the sketch is not a rule that has to be followed. It is simply a starting point for you to build on. I also made some changes to the title and journaling placement. A lot of times on a 2-page layout, I like to balance things by putting my title and journaling in opposite areas of the layout. For this particular layout, I have my title on the bottom left edge of the photos and my journaling at the top right edge. I also swapped out the journaling strips for a block. This worked out better, in my opinion, with the way the photos have been changed and how they go across the whole layout. For my embellishments, I kept it somewhat simple. There's a lot of busier pattern papers on this layout, and I didn't want to overwhelm it with tons of busy embellishments. I mainly used stars and layered them together, and then I added a few phrase stickers. This layout in some aspects was easy and in some it wasn't. It was much easier to arrange the slanted pieces than I was expecting. But the tough part is that when working with slants and 2 pages, getting things to line up can be a little more complicated. When I had 2 pieces that went across both pages, a lot of times I could cut the first slant and then use the cutoff piece by flipping it so the angled piece was on top as the connecting piece on the other page. That's an easy way to have the exact same angle on both pieces for both sides of the layout. So that's it for this episode of Sketch Support. Don't forget to grab that free sketch at scrapbookgeneration.com and also check out all of the new sketches we have. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.